Hello Bates faculty, this is Dan Sanford from Writing at Bates. In this workshop we're focusing on critical thinking, which is something that we hear about from many of you. It's a common sentiment here and elsewhere that faculty would like to see more evidence of critical thinking from their students. Fortunately, there's a ton of great research on creating writing assignments that foster and encourage and reward critical thinking. My goal here is to distill some of that for you in a way that you can use in your courses. The thing about critical thinking is that we all want it from our students, but it can be difficult to communicate what we want to the writers in our courses. One way we can think about critical thinking is using Bloom's taxonomy. Lower order thinking skills are things like memorization and comprehension. Higher order thinking is things like synthesis and analysis, not just remembering information, but evaluating and applying it. Generally, when we say we want critical thinking from our students, these items at the top of the scale are what we want. Elder and Paul note that well-cultivated critical thinkers raise vital questions and problems, formulating them clearly and precisely. They gather and assess relevant information using abstract ideas to interpret it effectively. They come to well-reasoned conclusions and solutions, testing them against relevant criteria and standards. They think open-mindedly, recognizing and assessing their own assumptions, implications, and practical consequences. And they communicate effectively with others in figuring out solutions to complex problems. William Perry observed that students tend to enter college thinking of knowledge as the acquisition of right answers and of writing as a way to evidence their knowledge. As a little bit of time goes by and they're exposed to a wealth of new ideas, they start thinking in more relativistic terms. All opposing viewpoints are valid and everyone has a right to their point of view. Mature writers and thinkers come to the point of view that writing means joining a conversation, that arguments have stakes and opposing viewpoints have to be taken into account. That is, of course, what we want. How do we do this? How do we assign writing in a way that encourages cognitive maturity and that scaffolds students in grappling with ideas in a robust way? Graff and Birkenstein suggest that we do this by encouraging students to think of writing as dialogic, as a way to participate in a conversation of ideas in the way that scholars do. They advise us to teach our students to think and write like people in our field, like biologists, like economists, like historians, by mentoring them on the rhetorical moves that people in your field use. The title of their book refers to ways people position ideas in writing. In the past, people have said this, but I say this. This problem exists. Here's a solution. This is the state of the field. Here's how I'm pushing it forward. When we make these moves explicit, we help students along in their journey towards finding a voice in a field or discipline. Peter Elbow suggests that if we want our students to think, what we need to teach them is revision. The process of moving a piece of writing through multiple drafts is the process of clarifying one's ideas. Writing is a way to incubate an idea. Drafting and redrafting encourages and guides the process of students engaging with problems and clarifying their own ideas. There are lots of ways we can make space for revision in our classes. You can incorporate more low-stakes exploratory writing. You can sequence writing assignments so that students can build on the same idea in successive pieces of writing. Give students the chance to show their writing to an audience, get feedback, and integrate that feedback. That feedback could come from you, it could come from others in the class, it could come from a PWSA or a writing tutor. What's important is that the feedback is at the level of ideas, not of formal polish. Remember, what we care about here is their thinking. Editing will come later in the process. What we want is for students to have the chance to think about how their writing is being received by a reader, and to think about how to change their ideas or how they're presenting their ideas. Also, we all do a lot of revision in our own scholarly writing. Think about showing that to your students, how a manuscript started and how it changed as you responded to peer review. That was a lot of thinking about critical thinking. Here are some things you can use. 10 strategies for assigning writing in a way that fosters critical thinking. These all come from John Bean's Engaging Ideas. It's a book that I can't recommend highly enough if you're interested in a resource that will totally change and enrich the way that you assign writing in your courses. Strategy 1. Think of ways for students to link the content that they're learning in your course to their personal experience. Learning takes place when students attach new information to their existing knowledge structures. This type of assignment uses writing to bring that knowledge to the fore. It creates a hook for new ideas to hang on. This physics assignment challenges students to think about what they already know about vectors and why it's worth knowing more. Strategy 2. Ask students to explain difficult concepts to a beginner. Part of what makes this type of assignment so effective is that it sets up a rhetorical situation. It gives them a task and an audience to think of. It's something students can sink their teeth into without getting hung up on an essay structure. It's fun, and best of all, this is short. Students have to think a lot to write this, but the resulting writing is very fast to grade. Strategy 3. Think of theses that take a bold stance and that reflect real controversies in your field. Have students alternately defend or attack that view using evidence and argument. In doing this, we're supporting students in their development of argumentation. We're modeling what effective statements of thesis look like, and we're showing what writing is for, taking a stance on topics that intelligent people can and do disagree on. Strategy 4. Think of interesting, challenging problems for your students to address in writing. What better way to teach that writing is a tool for thinking things through? Strategy 5. Give students data, such as lists, graphs, or tables, and have them write an argument or analysis based on the data. Have students account for patterns in the data. Doing this, and having students critique one another's analyses, is a great way to prime students for thinking of peer review at the level of ideas and argumentation, rather than just grammar and editing. Strategy 6. Design templates that will guide your students through a thinking process that you value. Often there's a pattern that we like to see in student writing, or perhaps in the writing for a particular course or assignment. If we can make that pattern explicit for students, we help them to succeed on that piece of writing, and we scaffold them in internalizing the habits of mind that we use in the academy. A template can create a frame of slots and transitions that students can then flesh out with generalizations and supporting details. Or you can take this a step further and actually frame assignments. Provide the topic sentence and the major transition words as an organizational frame for an argument that students have to flesh out with appropriate generalizations and supporting data. It's a perfect way to have students start a longer piece of writing. Strategy 7. Create what-if situations. Imagine X from the perspective of Y. How would this thinker respond to this situation? These are exciting to write, and they're refreshing to read. They make for a wonderful change of pace from grading essays, and they're a great way to get students putting authors' ideas in conversation with one another and thinking through the implications of points of view. Strategy 8. Select important articles in your field and ask students to write summaries or abstracts of them. Summaries and abstracts are both important genres for students to master. In practicing them, they're also being exposed to good models for argument structure, and they're practicing taking their own point of view out of their writing so that they can accurately report a source author's point of view. You could also try having students create summaries or abstracts for your lectures, which encourages them to more critically engage with what you're saying. Strategy 9. Think of a controversy in your field and ask students to write a dialogue between two characters with different points of view on that controversy. These can be just deliriously fun assignments. Often students have the task of getting inside the head of important historical personages or thinkers. Along the way, students can play around with points of view without yet having to commit themselves to a side of the issue, and they're practicing the habit of mind of responding to opposing points of view. Strategy 10. Develop cases by writing scenarios that place students in realistic situations relevant to your discipline, where they have to reach a decision in order to resolve a conflict. These give students a purpose and an audience because they're writing from the perspective of someone in the situation. They can be timely and topical if you pull your scenarios from current events. Ideally, your case is challenging and doesn't have just one right answer, so that students have to think the issue through carefully and ideally engage their peers. When you use assignments like these as intermediate steps towards more traditional academic essays, those essays become better because students have to more carefully think through their position. They also stand on their own as tools for teaching students how to think critically, how to think using the habits of mind that people in your field use, and how to use writing to do so. Thanks for your time, and if you'd like to talk more about writing and critical thinking in your course, please send us a message at writing@bates.edu.